Happy Easter to everyone. We're teenagers. We're 18. We are 18 days away from the NFL draft. It is a locker room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 Central on Sports Radio 610 in the Odyssey app. We're finally getting there. The draft, 18 days away. I got 5 Easter questions about the Houston Texans and the build up to the draft as cabin fever intensifies and the speculation continues. Question number 1, and this was discussed online. We've discussed it on the air as well. Would fans lose it if it's not a QB at number 2? Nick Caserio had every opportunity to have the number 1 overall pick. He screwed it up. Brandon Cooks should not have been active, and the Texans should have done everything they could have. He probably should have been traded to get the number 1 pick. Now, there's whispers that maybe they like Bryce Young more than anyone else, and if they don't get Bryce Young at 2, that maybe they could adjust, they could pivot, they could draft Will Anderson. I think the D'Amico Ryans hire gives the Texans a little bit of leeway in that you have a solid face of the franchise that can go up there and try to explain this. I don't think Nick Caserio himself, like say he had hired anyone but D'Amico, could go up there and explain it. Maybe Sean Payton could to make the fans that were maybe upset feel more comfortable. But I do think there's a little bit of trust. There's a little bit of excitement, and there is a little bit of appreciation that you do have stable people making the decisions right now and not the POS, Jack Easterby, Bill O'Brien, et cetera. So I do think, I can't speak for all fans. I can't generalize all fans. Shout out to all the Texans fans. We are in this together. But I will say that there would be a portion that would be upset, but the blowback in the big scheme of things really doesn't matter. There were people upset when the Texans took Mario Williams instead of Vince Young. Mario ended up being pretty decent. So it really doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. I don't want to simplify it and say that they got to just go win, but they have to do at this point. Tell me if you've heard this before. What's in the best interest of the Houston Texans? And we'll hear Nick Caserio say that, although it would be a hard pill to swallow for me personally if they passed on a quarterback because Nick Caserio didn't do what was in the best interest of the Houston Texans when it mattered most with the handling of the Brandon Cook situation and the fact that he was active. The one thing I do hate is when someone says, and I've heard everyone from John McClain to some of the listeners, shout out to the Loopholes if you listen, you are one, say they got to draft a quarterback. They got to draft a quarterback. I hate that. Like, if you want to say, I like CJ Stroud, if you want to say, I like Bryce Young, if you even want to say, I like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, that's cool. But draft a quarterback, that'll get you in trouble, that mindset. And I hope the Texans don't have that mindset. I hope if they draft CJ Stroud, it's because they like CJ Stroud. I hope if they draft Bryce Young, it's because they like Bryce Young as a franchise quarterback, not because they feel like they need to draft a quarterback. So to answer the question, yes, I do think some fans would lose their mind. I don't think the backlash would be as bad as it would be had the Texans not hired a great face of the franchise and a guy, a wise leader like D'Amico Ryans. And in the big scheme of things, it really doesn't matter, especially if they draft the alternative of drafting a bad quarterback or drafting someone like Will Anderson. Who knows? I would rather them, if they're not going to take a quarterback, though, I would rather trade back and stockpile some more picks to where maybe, not saying you tank, you still try to win games. And it's very possible they could win games even if they don't draft a quarterback because they have improved the roster. And we don't know how D'Amico Ryans is going to coach guys up. But I would rather trade, stockpile, so you at least have some ammo potentially for next year. And what's the drop-off from Will Anderson and having multiple picks and being able to address a lot more stuff? That's where I would start to weigh stuff a little bit differently and say, yeah, just trade back. Question number 2, what if Bryce Young didn't exist? Now, I'm not saying Bryce Young disappears, but what if Bryce Young had stayed at Alabama and Bryce Young was not in this draft and the Texans had the number 1 pick in the draft? Let's say Carolina's not even a factor. Let's say the Texans have the number 1 pick and we're just removing the possibility of Bryce Young, and it was CJ Stroud, Will Anderson, and the other quarterbacks, would the idea of not drafting a quarterback seem as outlandish to the people who it might seem outlandish to? In other words, are you is this a situation where if you are a Bryce Young person, if you are a Bryce or bust guy, is it almost like a make right and try to at least get a quarterback, even if it's not your quarterback? How much different will we look at the Texans taking Will Anderson instead of CJ Stroud if Bryce Young didn't go 10 minutes earlier? It's just something to think about. I do wonder if the mindset would be a little bit different and a little bit more forgiving if Bryce Young weren't in this draft. And we were talking about just CJ Stroud versus Will Anderson. I know it sounds crazy, but when you have the quarterback taken right in front, I think there's a lot of people who feel like, well, we better get somebody at this point. And it goes back to the draft a quarterback conversation. Question 3, whose opinion matters the most? The organizational structure is new. Nick Caserio has been here now. This is going to be his 3rd draft. Completely different than the situation he walked into. He walked into a disaster. We don't need to rehash it. We know what happened. Quarterback wanted out. I'm kind of rehashing it. You had the POS here, and you were suffering the sins of the past when it came to Bill O'Brien and the POS, person of service, Jack Easterby. This is a different situation, different dynamic, but you have a head coach who many believe is going to be the long-term guy here for a while. He's the face of the franchise. You seem to be working well together. When there is a disagreement, and there's going to be disagreements, there's going to be healthy disagreements. Some are going to be more intense than others. Like, let's say that D'Amico Ryans really, really wants player A, and Nick Caserio wants player B. And it's to the point where they're both pounding the table and they both want what they want. Who has the say? Whose opinion matters the most? You would think it would be the general manager, but in this situation, does D'Amico Ryans get the tiebreaker? Does he have the longer shelf life than Nick Caserio? Hopefully they can discuss it accordingly, but whose opinion matters the most? They're going to have to work together. Does D'Amico Ryans get the final say, or is it all Nick Caserio? Question 4, how much pull does Bobby SLOWIK have? The offensive coordinator, Bobby SLOWIK, he's got a hell of a film background. Kyle Shanahan has had some really good things to say about Bobby SLOWIK. He had the same position last year that Mike McDaniel had before he went to the Miami Dolphins. He's bringing in that Shanahan offense. He's got a tape background at Pro Football Focus. Sounds like a pretty insightful guy. How much pull does he have? D'Amico Ryans is a defensive guy. I know he's going to have opinions. It's actually pretty enlightening when he talks offense. It's not just generic like Lovie Smith. We want to run the ball this many times, and we want to control the clock, and we want to be physical. There's some nuance when D'Amico Ryans talks offense. Bobby SLOWIK and him, they started in San Francisco at the same time. They know each other. D'Amico Ryans trusts Bobby SLOWIK to oversee his offense as he begins his dream job. So obviously there's some trust there. How much pull does SLOWIK have? Is Bobby SLOWIK the guy that is looking at these quarterbacks and saying who he likes? Is Bobby SLOWIK going to be the guy that says, I don't want CJ Stroud? Or is he going to pound the table for CJ Stroud? How much pull does he have? Is it just a situation where D'Amico and Nick decide and they give Bobby SLOWIK players and he has to make it work? To a certain point, yes. But is Bobby SLOWIK a guy who can go in there and because he's the one calling the offense, because he's the one that D'Amico Ryans is trusting, because he's the one that Nick Caserio agreed to bring in, how much pull does Bobby SLOWIK have? Be really interesting to know. We may never know, but I do wonder how much he has and how he feels about these quarterbacks. Question 5, the business element. John McClain brought this up the other day, talking about the business impact of the Texans' decision making and all that. I talked about this back when they were searching for a coach, and I did think that Max Buzz was something that this team needed. I think if they had had the number one pick, they would have benefited significantly, business-wise and really every way possible. But Nick Caserio didn't do everything he could. That was in the best interest of the Houston Texans. But the business standpoint then, like as far as the hire, I think maybe it could have mattered. I think maybe Cal McNair and Hannah McNair could have, would have, and maybe should have nudged Nick towards D'Amico Ryans. Now, it does seem like they really like each other, so I don't think they held a gun to his head and made him make the move. But the business element of bringing in D'Amico Ryans, it's there. I don't know if it was a factor. I think D'Amico Ryans was one of the best candidates, but it's there. And you can feel it. You can see the shirts. You can see the cap shirt. You can see the coach jersey. You can feel the excitement. I think they've got 3,000 new season ticket holders, a 90% renewal. So the business impact right now, if you ask the guys in the business department, Doug and Greg and all the other folks, would you like them to take a quarterback? Of course. A quarterback's going to sell jerseys. You want a face of the franchise, et cetera. But I think in the business department, no matter what the Texans do, I think that they have a lot to work with the current vibe, the way things are going, the way things feel, the way this team is talked about. The national narrative has just gone away. All the BS that they were throwing out there has just gone away as if it never happened. So the business element, I think it's good right now. I don't think they're going to be nudged, hey, take a quarterback so we can get a buzz. They got a lot to work with, and they do a good job in getting the job done, and people are excited. So those are the 5 questions. What do you say? What do you think? Could the Texans afford to pass on a quarterback? In the big scheme of things, they can. What would your personal reaction be? Would you think of it different if Bryce Young were not even in this draft? Business element, all that type of stuff. Happy Easter to everyone. Thanks for being here. Subscribe, like. We started this at the start of last season. I don't even think we've gone 7 months, and it's already building up, and the excitement is going. I appreciate everyone for listening to me on the radio, Sports Radio 610 in the Odyssey app, and I really appreciate everyone for joining me in this. It's been a really fun time. A lot to be thankful for. I know it's not Thanksgiving, but Easter, same-ish. You still count your blessings. And no matter what happens, just remember, we're teenagers. We're 18 days away from the draft. Happy Easter to everyone. No matter what happens, no matter what the answer to these questions are, just remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in this together. Enjoy Easter.